Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Iblis Manifestations podcast. On this new episode, it's my honor to have none other than Mr. Adrian Baxter. He is a designer, illustrator, whose themes of work very much revolve around death, spirituality, and the psychological aspect of the human existence, or rather, condition. Him and I had a very interesting and very enjoyable conversation, and as so it happens, he's actually a listener of the podcast, so of course, that made it a little bit more easier to, I suppose, have some deep dives into certain topics with him. We talked a lot about just staying aligned with one's own purpose, but also accessing creativity, which of course for him, that's his living. So it was very interesting to get into that. Also, as a creative myself, it was very inspiring to have a take of his perspective as well. And we actually talked a bit about some of the more mundane things in life that can actually assist with creativity, such as diet. So yeah, it was a very interesting conversation, and shortly we'll be coming that. Before we get into the episode, as always, thank you all for tuning into Iblis Manifestations podcast. And if you do enjoy the conversations and what we have to share, please consider subscribing and furthermore in sharing this content. It's all available for free. There are about 35 other episodes other than the one that you're about to listen to, so feel free to go and check those out. I mainly speak to a lot of people within black metal, but it's not limited to that at all, and I am interested in trying to figure out the truths of things. So yeah, there's a lot going on there, so feel free to go and check that out. And yeah, thank you for your support. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please allow me to welcome Mr. Adrian Baxter to Iblis Manifestations. Okay, good evening, Mr. Adrian Baxter. Welcome to Iblis Manifestations, man. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you on here. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, thank you, and thank you for the invite. I've been looking forward to this too. I really enjoy what you do. I love that you get into the nitty gritty with all the kind of music side of it, but then you have room for the personal sides, and I love that side of the conversation. So yeah, keep doing it, man. I really enjoy it.
Fantastic. It's great to hear, man. I mean, the nitty and gritty, that's exactly why we do what we do on here. You know, that's always the thing I've been interested in. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of different media outlets out there where people will be talking about music, and you know, it's like, what are your influences, or just arts in general. You know, it's obviously not exclusive, just music related guests, but I'm always more interested to know the personal perspective of what makes someone do what they do, you know, and what they learn from that. So, which is exactly
whatever it is they're doing. There's a reason for them that they're doing that, and there are multiple paths to whether it's writing music, creating artwork, anything. They've got their own path to that. So, sort of hearing how they got there, I've always enjoyed.
Absolutely, man. And that is exactly why I've got yourself on the show. So tell me a little bit, Adrian, just about your background. Obviously, you're mostly known as a graphic designer as well as a visual artist. So just tell me a little bit about your background and what got you started on this.
I'll start with the cliche answer of I've always drawn from being tiny.
Mhm.
I've always had paper and pens, and my parents have always kind of just kept me supplied, kept me occupied, you know. And I was just always doodling, and then that progressed to sort of larger pieces of just sometimes abstract things, not even like of anything in particular. It was just a case of I had to have a pen in my hand doing something. And then it's felt like over the years, it's kind of taken a step up to each stage kind of thing where I'd actually half plan pieces. And that was always a hobby. And then I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I found some illustrators online that were doing kind of similar work, obviously like higher level, but similar kind of style.
Mhm.
And they'd post like progress photos of like sketches and just kind of just parts of the process. And like I said earlier, sort of that that connected, you know, I connected on that level of seeing the steps to it. So that influenced me to share my version of that just on like personal uh, social media. And then as kind of things picked up, some more people noticing, and then people I didn't know was noticing. And then eventually I set up my own page, my own Facebook, and kind of it's been that ever since. Basically, I've just uploaded progress, finished pieces, and then obviously the nature of social media that spreads, different people see it, and then eventually, can't remember who the first official band was, but I got an email uh, asking for this kind of work that I'd be doing, you know, for my own personal work, and that kind of made me think, and this is a path at very least I could try. I'd never imagined I'd be here sort of 6 years ago doing the same, essentially the exact same thing. Um, and I don't want to say I winged it, but I just kind of took each project as its own sort of thing. I didn't overthink it. I didn't try and, yeah, I maybe had some bands in mind that I'd love to work with, but I almost kind of pulled myself back and was just like, just do my thing for the bands that I have at that time and just kind of try and let it build naturally. And then, yeah, 6 years later, I'm still at it.
That's fantastic, man. And I think one thing that's actually crucial to point out here as well, obviously, I'm sure that some of the listeners will already be familiar with your work, but I think it's important to point out that you have a very certain type of consistency and a real, I should say, a trademark kind of style to the way that you do artwork. And I get that, obviously, that's mainly for pieces that you do yourself, but I've also seen stuff that you've done that are quite different as well. I think you did this, I think it was an album or perhaps an EP, but it was for a band called II, and it was called Men Are Ugly. And that's a very unique cover because that's completely different to the other kind of stuff that you've done. So I can completely appreciate the way that you can sort of, I suppose, mutate your skills in a setting like this. But just tell me a little bit more about the specific style that you have, because there's very much a traditional element to it, but there's also, I mean, it's very much like it's kind of like engineering work almost. I want to get to know the origin of how you got to that kind of trademark style that you're creating at the moment.
Yeah, there's almost two parts to it. So if you think of the technique of physically drawing and putting something together, that will lend itself to both client work and my own work. So the reason my own personal work has its own kind of look, maybe compared to client work generally, because that's all me. I'm not kind of taking anyone's ideas into consideration. That's all me. The technique is generally the same. The physical side of it, everything that goes into it is the same. But in terms of kind of what comes here and gets laid out, that's all my work.
Sure.
So then for the client work, obviously, sometimes they have quite a detailed brief. Sometimes they let me do my thing and everything in between. So there's an element of me kind of working with them on the image. You know, that's why, like with the II cover, that was all their brief. So I take their brief and then apply my sort of techniques to that. And that's where you get the kind of my style, but different elements that I wouldn't maybe normally use. And then, like I say, sometimes clients give me almost nothing and sort of say, do your thing. And then sometimes they have a full thing laid out. So I work as necessary within those boundaries, really.
I can completely appreciate that. And, you know, as a musician, this is actually something that I've very much learned, you know, and I say musician, but also, I suppose, the creative director of what I do in my own projects, obviously Trivax with being the main one. When we did this last album, it's not out yet, but the most important thing that I learned was not to dictate what the artist is doing. I'm good at composing music. I'm good at coming up with certain ideas, and I guess the more the statement of what this stands for. But a lot of things, let's say, for example, whether it's in videos, whether it's artwork, whether it's photo shoots, it's good to have an idea of what you might be after, but that person that you're working with, they've dedicated their entire life to doing that thing that they're doing, you know, and you need them for that, you know. So sometimes it's good to actually let people take the reins and do things on their own, because there's a lot of labor involved as well, and you want to feel like you want to do it rather than like, oh, you're forced to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always assume every illustrator has their own kind of preference, and I know some that won't take any direction at all. It's kind of whatever I put together. If you're into it, cool. If you're not, fair enough. And that, you know, that works for them, and that's great. There's some that need everything laying out. And I only know this from kind of seeing their process online and like conversations and things. But for me, I love it when a band kind of has an idea. It's almost like I always imagine it like they're kind of pointing me at the path and then going, walk down there and kind of see what you find, rather than walking with me down there, if that makes sense.
Sure,
so
yeah.
Kind of giving me a nugget to kind of work with, and then I can build on that. Then for me, that's ideal, because I quite often ask for references of my own work that got them to the point of emailing me. Because like you say, some of my stuff is kind of, I love trying different techniques out, different styles. So if there's one particular thing I've tried that's new for me, that's caught their eye, that's important for me to know, so that I could try and include that, you know. And that's how you end up getting that end result that fits them, but also fits me and what I do. And it kind of works for everyone then.
Absolutely. What's it been like having people like, obviously, bands like Paradise Lost or even the Halo Effect, which are obviously not exactly within the black metal thing, but they're legendary bands nevertheless, or at least with the Halo Effect, they have members of legendary bands. So what's it been like working with those?
Great, honestly. That it kind of, as soon as those kind of emails come in, it splits me in two. I have the fanboy mode of like, these are who I grew up listening to. These bands, you know, introduced me to a lot of other bands and all that kind of thing. But then I have to kind of pop that to one side for a second and then do the professional mode and deal with the email and deal with the business side of it. But then as things kind of progress, both of those kind of come in the middle, and it's relaxed, and it generally works fine. And it's been, yeah, great all around. To be honest, I'm quite lucky that 99% of my clients are just open creatively, but also know what they want to a point that works for both of us. Um, I mean, you hear of some bigger clients for some illustrators that are kind of almost impossible to work with, and I've never understood how they expect to get something that I don't know that they have to create themselves in order to be happy. Whereas, you come into an illustrator, it's kind of meet in the middle somewhere. But I've been very lucky in that sense that it's been fun, even though they are, people I've looked up to and admire musically. We've managed to kind of meet in the middle. None of that's affected anything. So yeah, it's been fun, and it's weird looking back. I remember listening to the first album I heard from Paradise Lost. I think it was Faith Divides Us. And as I do with most bands, you hear an album, it clicks, great, I'm all in. I go back, because at the time that was the most recent album. So I go back and I go, right, where have they come from? Like, I literally go back to the first demo, EP, anything I can find online.
Sure.
And again, it's the love for the process, hearing what they've tried over the different albums and kind of where they've got to what they've tried with the artwork, anything that they've come back to, and all that. I love all of that. So to be included in their discography at any point, it's great, and it's been an honor working with them and Halo Effect and others. And I truly don't think it's going to really sink in until sort of another 10 years when I look back at their discography and the album's in there somewhere. Because as soon as I'm done with a project, it's like, okay, next one, and I rarely get a chance to kind of really sit on it. But yeah, it's all good fun.
I feel you, man. There is definitely something to that. I mean, the closest example, at least I can personally relate to that, I can think of off the top of my head, is we did this sort of a mini tour with this Norwegian band, Beyond Man, last year. And that's obviously like one half of that is the members of One Tail, One Head. And with my friend Bjorn, who I've had on the podcast before, one of the early episodes. And I still joke to my bass player now. I'm like, I can't believe that we fucking toured with those guys, in the UK and shared the same van. And obviously, they're friends now, so it's like it's not even, it's a normal thing. But then there's still that part of me that's like, fuck, that's it's a unique thing when you when you sort of put yourself next to that, and then the fact that you've had those experiences, and the fact that it made perfect sense to do it as well. It's like the more we did it, it was like, oh, this is a perfect relationship, working relationship, and it's fascinating how I guess the combination of the self-perception that you have, and then when you observe someone and you appreciate their work, but then when you sort of find yourself next to it somehow. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a pull there that if circumstances allow, in terms of like even geographically or anything like that, there's a pull that you can't maybe, that you can only feel in terms of like what draws you to the music, to the art style, to the aesthetic of a band. There's a pull there, and if sometimes we're lucky enough to kind of meet, like literally meet people, but also meet in that environment. And that's something, we should always appreciate. And they can become friends as such, and maybe a bit more relaxed. Like, for you guys, if you're touring, obviously the level must kind of come down at a certain point. That first
very
meeting,
relaxed.
But up there, you're still kind of recognizing that what's brought you there and the level that you're on. So yeah, sure, that's almost the cherry on top of the hard work that built up to that.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And I do agree with you. It is something that like it just sort of comes together, doesn't it? It's that there might be that initial shock, but once you're there, then it does kind of make sense. And I guess on this is perhaps a bit vain, and perhaps this is more reflective of my own thought process that I would even ask such a question. But I don't know if you've had this happen to you yet or not. But how does it feel to know that, let's say, for example, at various different HMVs around the country, your artwork is sitting there somewhere. Let's say, for example, with the Paradise Lost album or the Halo Effect one. How does that feel?
Yeah, it's again, until I'm there standing in front of it, I don't think I can fully picture it. I mean, for the tours of the albums, you'll see photos online of like the backdrops and the t-shirts. And it's kind of a reminder that when I'm sat in my office with the sketches next to me and then it's all scanned in and done to a point, for me, I mean, naively, that's where it ends. But obviously that's not where it ends. But if I kind of let that get in there somewhere, I feel like that would kind of derail me a little bit. And I try not to overthink things, so otherwise I'm going to end up spiraling. But it's nice, sort of like you'll go out to a local gig or see friends, and then you'll see a shirt pop up. Like you'll see like a glimpse of just like a Paradise Lost shirt, and you're like, oh yeah, these things still exist out in like the real world kind of thing. So those are fun. It was weird at first, but I think I'm starting to like recognize the patterns now, and it's a bit more accepting. So, but yeah, that's the end result of that. It's kind of, I don't want to say, I don't know. It's that's the natural process, and as I recognize that more, it's just a part of the whole package now. Like the first few bands I worked with, I'd get nervous for like the release date. I'd get nervous for their fans seeing it, on all that kind of thing that I suppose is normal. I feel like looking back now, that's probably all natural part of the process. And it's just through experience. I think that kind of you recognize it all being part of one.
But actually, I think that's a great sign as well, because most importantly, that shows how much you actually care. That shows how much you care about what you do, but also it's a clear indication that you're a fan of this music. Obviously, as I am, and I can immediately like recognize that just from you even talking about it. And I think that's a unique thing. So let's go back in time a bit, because obviously you have the close connotation with metal, even though your artwork isn't exclusive to metal music. I think that the majority of perhaps the bands, at least that you've worked for, fall under that category. And you yourself, I can clearly see that you're a fan. And I've seen an old picture of you when you used to play in Hollow Earth, when you're wearing a Pig Destroyer shirt. So yeah. So just tell me a little bit. Obviously, you got into doing art at a young age, and then obviously at some point, presuming you got into metal as well. Where did the two get to coincide with one another?
So back in the Kerrang TV days, the good old days, just as the new metal thing was as in full swing, that's when I first kind of clicked onto that sort of alternative, whatever it is. I was brought up on a mixture of Meatloaf, Motown, Maiden, Michael Jackson, from both sides, both parents. So I know how much they kind of didn't necessarily listen to like the pop charts or anything. They had their own tastes. So I guess I kind of picked that up. And then as the music kind of clicked, for want of a better word, that obviously leads on to more bands. And then I was doing the artwork at the same time. So that the music naturally influenced the artwork somehow. Like I probably didn't even recognize it for years. It was just, those are the two things that I enjoyed doing. And I never really put them together, I guess, at that age. And then probably I want to say early to mid 20s, that's when I really recognized that the music I was listening to was influencing the artwork, so kind of going down the darker route, the more introspective route, that kind of thing. And then the new metal thing, that was a very swift gateway into, you know, the heavier stuff.
Agreed.
And like, just referring back to the Halo effect, Dark Tranquility that Michael sings in, they were one of the first bands that were like away from what was on telly, you know, not quite, maybe underground at that time. And then that's when I kind of veered off the mainstream kind of style. And obviously, like Metallica and stuff, they've been a constant. So they've obviously been expanding the world. But that led me on to kind of finding the intricacies in metal and what my taste clicked with, and like all the different variations. And it was just this like flood. Like back then, there was Last FM that would, almost like what Spotify does now, it kind of collects your music tastes and gives you recommendations. And for me, that was like a gold mine. And it still is now in that sense.
Sure. I remember Last FM. I used to use it for a little while too.
Yeah, I think it might even still be going. But yeah, that was a massive kind of. It almost encouraged me to keep seeking bands and music and like really refine my tastes. And then also recognize that like even now, some days I can listen to some of the heaviest music there is, but other days it can be ambient, instrumental, anything, you know, whatever I connect with on that particular day. And it was all the opportunities to kind of look down all these different paths of alternative music, and like I say, refine tastes and recognize that. So that's all gone into my artwork somehow up here, and it still does now. So that's why I think sometimes my work's darker than other times. Sometimes it includes color and all that kind of thing. It's in the exact same vein of you don't want to kind of be stuck in one box, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Conscious of that.
Yeah, absolutely, man, and I think that's actually very important. And it's funny, like as you're explaining that, I feel like even though I guess the main thing that you do is being is creating artwork and visual pieces, I can completely relate to what you're saying, but also that I can see much similarities with a lot of my musician friends who I take seriously as artists, which I think that in itself is an interesting thing to try and observe, just from a perhaps even a psychological perspective. But you know, just when you're speaking about the different types of music that you were listening to, and then getting into that, what was it that connected with you personally about it? What do you think it was that you even went down that path? Obviously, starting on new metal and then getting a bit heavier, because I actually, by the way, I very much relate to that progression, because it was the same for me too. You know, like I initially knew new metal, and then I got to discover I want to say the real stuff, and then kind of went down a fucking rabbit hole. So what was it for you personally that got you to connect with that?
You could tell, like for the legit bands, you could tell that they had to do it to express whatever they were expressing. They had to do it. And I think a lot of the stuff that was on telly, probably I never really felt like that. So as soon as I got off, let's say, the mainstream stuff, that's where you sort of see a more true representation of what a band's trying to say. Like, as in, it's their personal message. It's not to try and get on telly. It's not to try and look cool. It's none of that. It's they have their own thing they have to release and express. And yeah, I think that's the essence that I kind of connected with. And then you learn sort of how bands that are doing that kind of experiment with different things, come back to different things. And I always appreciated how bands recognize their whole like visual package as well as the audible package, if that makes sense.
Of course,
You
yeah.
know, the bands kind of take note of their image, their aesthetic in general. I was just like, okay, mentally they're all in, you know. And as soon as I had any whiff of a band kind of not being quite genuine to themselves, it didn't sound good and it looked good, and it's kind of fair enough. I'll move on from them. And then you click with other bands, you know, that you kind of there's none of it's like they've filtered out the bullshit, and they've got to whatever it is they need. They've got to that, and I think that's what people connect with in terms of like the extreme side of music, not just metal, but kind of anything that's, I don't want to say challenging, but anything that kind of just requires your attention more than kind of a quick listen or a quick glance where you can kind of soak it up, you know. Yeah, there's some days where you just want riffs and you just want Pantera or whatever. That's fair. I'm all for that. But you know, I think for a lot of creative minds, I imagine it must be similar for songwriters and bands that kind of see artists doing a similar thing, as in not trying to be cool, not trying to emulate other artists and illustrators. They do their own thing. There must be a meeting point in the middle somewhere there.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's such an important thing. I mean, for me personally, the way I look at it is that there's already a lot of stuff that exists out there. So be it music, be it artwork, be it films even, you know, be it whatever. In some sense, I am respectful to people because, as you can probably agree with this, one way of actually getting to know yourself is through self-expression. So sometimes until you've created a piece, until you've said a word out loud, until you've released something, it's like every time you do that, you unlock a new part of yourself, or at least a better understanding of who you are as a person, as well as an artist. And absolutely. I think, and I think that for me, when it comes to the point of being a consumer, or rather an observer, really, is that I want to, just like yourself, feed off of the genuine spirit that is behind something, and that it has been created not out of a want, but a need. I want there to be that fire behind art, and that's also why I'm like, when it comes to listening to metal, I don't listen to anyone. I'm actually extremely picky about it. You know, like some days, you know, like if I stick on like some, I don't know, like synthwave or whatever, I'm not as fussed. So it's like, oh, you know, I just want it to sound good, and that's what I want at this time. That's what I'm shopping for. But if it's metal, that's something I take especially very seriously, and the same with I guess, you know, with artwork. With films, like I said, you know, I want to feel something, and if I feel that there's an absence of that there, then it's just not something that's going to appeal to me. So I guess that there is a sense of elitism, but it's not an elitism of you have to fit into a certain aesthetic or a certain sound. I'm just elitist in the sense that I want to feel that it's something genuine. If that makes sense.
I think it's fair to be self-elitist.
Sure.
If that's even a term. Be elitist in your own taste. It's not that we're saying someone can't do the things we're not into, obviously not. But we owe it to ourselves to be particular about what we consume, whether that's music, film, artwork, anything that we soak up. It's on us to kind of filter that and make sure that it resonates with us positively. Sure. I don't want to get too deep, but I avoid.
You can if you want.
I avoid the news, and there's a part of me that's like, you can't just avoid it. You know, these things are happening. You have to recognize what's going on, and yep, that's fair. But there comes a point where I'm soaking that in, and then it's not going anywhere. Like I can't use that in any way. And that may be on me for being, for avoiding or anything, but I carry things around in my head really easily. So I need to really curate what's coming in and how it's coming in, and then how that comes back out with artwork, music, or anything. It's kind of, we process things whether we realize it or not. Anything that's around us that we put ourselves in or not, it all gets processed and it all gets used in the words we use, anything, the conversations we have. So I think that's where I really value kind of like anything creative I'm seeing from other people. As soon as I click that they're on like a similar level, I'm all in. And even when bands try new things, if an artist tries a new thing, anything, I love that as well, because it shows they're kind of they're just all in on that process, and that's something I can really relate to.
You know, you said something I think extremely important there, and I want to get into that. And perhaps, I don't know if everyone will look at things this way or not, but there's one thing that's for sure, and it's that artists and creative people in general are more sensitive to a lot of things. Now, I'll even try to give some kind of primal example of that, and it's that I think, to me at least, I think us human beings, everything that we do, or at least that a lot of what we identify ourselves with, is actually our reactions to things. You know, like, for example, someone could put an ideology in front of you, could be a political ideology, could be left or right, and your reaction to that, but also the way it's presented to you, it's going to determine your identity in a sense when it comes to that. And I think that when you're an artist, you're essentially like a sponge. You know, like you said earlier, is that you take all this stuff in, but like you said, certain things you might not be able to put out. I fully agree with you on that. You know, that there's a reason why I don't have a Netflix subscription. I don't have like a lot of these things. I don't pay attention to them. I'm very particular about what news or what podcasts or what music I consume, and that's, I think, exactly the reason why, because you take it in. You know what matters to you. Because let's look at it like this, right? You just said that you essentially you can look at yourself as like a vessel. Is that you listen to all the music that you listen to, you look at all the artwork, but you also take in you digest all of the emotional process that actually comes off of these art pieces, and then you sort of shine that back out into the world through the process of your own art and with your own trademark signature or whatever that is. That's self-expression, which I was talking about.
Not just artists, like I say, even with how they speak to people, how they take on criticism, everything, like you say, everything is affected by how we've processed anything up to that point. You know, and it just so happens for yourself with your music, myself with the artwork, that's our way of, that's the result, that's the end package of that. Whereas other people, if they're not doing those things, they've got their own version of that. And I think people can get lost in the loop of not recognizing, whether they want to or not, they are processing what's going in.
Exactly, yeah. This is something that, like, especially, obviously I'm not from Britain, but I've spent a considerable number of years here now, which of course I'm grateful for. But the one thing that I've noticed, especially in the society here, is how reactionary people are, and that's like, it's like that defines the entirety of people's politics. You know, like, you always have these scapegoats and celebrities that everyone just hates on, and everyone, it's almost like the system offers you a reason to hate something or someone just so that you hate that person and not the system. It's very fascinating to me how that process
Yeah.
actually works. I'm
Yeah,
sure
they
you
know
can
what to do.
probably recognize that. Yeah. It's not like
Yeah.
like I even remember back in some years ago, wasn't there, obviously when she was alive, but wasn't there like a day or something where people can freely just go and swear at the Buckingham Palace, and just swear at the Queen and then say, fuck you, bitch, whatever. People used to be able to, I think, but just the fact that people would be allowed to do such a thing, I don't know if there was like a specific day they could do it, or just the fact that they could protest, kind of, that's, I guess, a tool of good. Get it out of your system. Let yourself think that you've just done some good. You've just made some changes in the world, and then now go back to your lives and shut the fuck up. That's
It just shows
essentially
how much control they've got if they can just tweak it that little bit, have one day, and it's like, right, no, back to your pen.
back to your pen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to a point, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not off living in the woods, not connected to the internet, no elect. I'm not living wild. So there's a certain part that, as much as I kind of avoid with the news and stuff, yeah, I'm locked into social media. I wouldn't be working how I am now because of it. So
Sure.
as much as I do have my own personal Facebook, but I'll be honest, it's mostly pictures of my dog. Like, and I don't really interact with any like articles or anything. And then I use it for work, and I probably interact with more through my work page in terms of, again, like going back to curating what's in our environment. I used to hate the whole liking thing on Facebook or Instagram. It was like, I used to just say, well, I like that. I don't need to double click. I just have to think I like that. But I've learned now it's important to kind of, because of the algorithm and all that crap, that's just another way. If you like something, you're going to get more of it. If you interact with it, you're going to get more of it, which is the exact same in real life. So I recognize now that, yeah, there's times where I dip into social media and I post or whatever, and I'm going to see things that I follow. But then I can still actively kind of encourage more of what I want to see within that. So I've made sure none of my social media or anything is kind of, what's the term? Is it doom scrolling? Is it that's the term or something?
Oh yes, I've heard that before. Yeah,
where it's just negative constantly. I've made sure none of that. So I guess it's kind of a human trait taken into the online world, which is weird, but also natural, I suppose, in a way. I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent now, but
no, I do hear what you're saying. I mean, I myself on Facebook especially, I think my unfollow button is callous to fuck. Just because I gotta, like we said earlier, I'm people are more than welcome to express themselves however way they wish. I am just very careful about how much of it I want to be a part of and what I choose to be a part of. And the same applies to people who would say follow me as well, or yourself. It's like this is a choice that we all have, and sometimes I think we forget that. Sometimes we feel like we have this way of I mean, you could almost even get really fucking deep on this and perhaps even observe the religious aspect of this, but we seem to think that like the world completely revolves around us, so anything that you see is like immediately you start generating your own ideas about it, which is a natural instinct to some extent, but then at the same time that goes a bit beyond that, and it's almost like you feel like you have to express that opinion about something, and it just creates this sort of thing, and like I think a lot of people just get sucked into shit without really recognizing it, especially also knowing that just on the case of social media, you've got fucking how many troll farms and then AI accounts, and I've
Yeah.
found so many of them. I've actually got like screenshots of accounts that I've seen posted on other pages. Then I'm a little bit of a detective sometimes, as you've probably already figured out, and and I kind of like go down rabbit holes, and then I'll find that, oh yeah, shit, this is not a real person. Yet this many people interacted with what this page had to say, and that's kind of like, oh, you got to
Yeah,
be
you
very
look at any
careful.
celebrity Instagram page and it's been posted for 2 minutes. There's 600 comments of bots, and you click on it just to find one real person, and you're scrolling, and
Yeah,
you just kind of go, all right, fair enough. That kind of,
there's
I don't
usually
need to do
like
anything with that.
there's usually like a fake chick profile on there, with her
Yeah,
ass on the fucking profile picture saying, "Oh, someone help, my boyfriend just left me," and then
yeah.
and then
And do you know what the bad thing
yeah,
is? Somewhere in
yes,
the world, someone will click that and think,
I
oh, they
know.
need help. It's
I
like,
think
okay.
I think there's probably a lot of people that click on those, otherwise why would it still be a thing? You know what I mean? And I think that's interesting. It's good. I think, you know what, it's such a good and valuable thing to be able to have a perspective, I guess, outside of these things, or just to be able to stretch your own imagination, uh, beyond the sort of the pen, as you put it earlier,
Yeah.
and just to be able to
That's,
look at it from
yeah,
distance.
I've learned that uh, I'm outside as much as I can. If I'm not working or sleeping, I'm out as much as I can, walking the dog. And I think it's more popular now, but in terms of like mental health, physical health, just conscious resets, people forget, I think, how being outdoors, how beneficial it is. And people, they assume that if they're sat indoors watching series or on Facebook or whatever, that's them being a part of society in a way, and it kind of is, but it's kind of really not. And
Mhm.
I, for as long as I can remember, I've always recognized the benefits of being out, and even for my work now, I always say I've got a sketchbook up here that I take with me out on a walk, and I'll kind of iron ideas out, and then I'll come back to my actual book.
Interesting.
And yeah, and it sounds really out there, but it's super simple and it works. And even like if I get an email with a design brief or something that is changing, I can read that, take that in, go for a walk, an hour or two's walk, and I can iron all that out in my head so that when it comes back to my desk, I've already done the thinking work and I can just do the physical side of it. And I think that's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said for that in everyone's life, everyone's version of that. Be active in terms of recognizing, yeah, if you spent most of the day indoors, chances are you'll benefit from an hour outside or even half hour, anything like that. And there's nothing to encourage that other than other people doing it and talking about it.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you remember in lockdown when all the powers that be were like, oh, yeah, you're allowed 30-minute walk a day, and everyone, oh, yeah, I'm going to do that. And you could have done that. You've been able to do that for years. Why do you need someone
Yeah.
to say, right, you're allowed 30 minutes? And it's, yeah,
I
anyway.
think no, you're absolutely right, man. That's such a fucking important thing. I mean, like the outdoors, just the physiological relationship that we actually have just with the sun itself, in terms of just balancing your circadian rhythm.
Yeah,
Just looking at sun in the morning, and then obviously throughout the day, getting that vitamin D if possible, just getting fresh air. These are extremely important things that I think most people, just like you said, kind of forget about.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually, yeah, that couldn't be any better. And you're in Yorkshire, by the way, right?
Yeah, I live on the edge of a little town called Haworth. That's kind of Leeds, Skipton area.
Okay. All
It's
right.
only small, but it's really historic. It's if I could pick somewhere to live, it's the kind of the idyllic little village, and that's my. When I go for a walk, I go wander around there. It's quiet. There's all the birds. There's fields. There's moorlands. There's everything, and that's all I need up there.
Hey, now then. No, that's good, man. Because yeah, I don't think we actually live that far from each other. Then in that case, so you mentioned obviously this was actually the perfect segue to one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. You mentioned that when you go out, you've already got like a sketchbook in your own head, and you work on that. And you know the thing that I find absolutely fascinating about what it is that yourself and people similar to yourself do is the abundance of creativity and the amount of work that's then involved in bringing that to life and manifesting it. You know. I was listening to. I've actually listened to a lot of podcasts and different interviews on this. I was just listening to one earlier tonight between Andrew Huberman and Rick Rubin, and they were talking about that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he's the man. I love his podcast, and I was just really fascinated by this, you know, and then just the whole process of creativity, because you're in a situation where obviously it's your job to be creative. It's your work to be a creative person and come up with ideas and create things from scratch, essentially. Obviously, you have, I suppose, a trademark or also like a backlog of other pieces that you could somehow fall upon, but it's going to be different every time. You know, it's like every time you make food, you might follow the same ingredients, but it's going to end up being different every single time. So how do you, I guess, access that, or how do you rely on it to just keep going? Because when I think about it, just from a personal perspective, when it comes to songwriting, one thing that gets me through it is the fact that I know no one's asked me to do it. I'm doing it because I fucking want to. I'm doing it because it's my expression and a big fuck you to the world, but also a big, I guess, I want to create a surge of empowerment as well. That's my sort of thing. The mental wrestle that I go through when I'm trying to create music. But I feel like if someone, or perhaps this would be different, but I guess if there was like a monetary incentive there for me, it's like, hey, come up with ideas. I'd just be like, I don't know, you know, like it would kind of be a bit of pressure. So how do you deal with that? Because you have to essentially remain creative on a consistent basis. How does that work for you?
Yeah. That's a process that I think you only learn through repetition, really, and recognizing. Again, this goes back to controlling what you consume, what you actively do, what you actively don't do, and it's recognizing what gets in the way of essentially being creative, using influences, using almost the same influences to create new ideas, but also still being within what I do as such. And this may sound really weird, but I think some people may relate at some point. For me, my diet, food wise, essentially controls how creative I am. I think a lot of us know junk food stifles all kind of motivation, creativity, it almost sets you in front of the TV and just plonks you there until you're done with it, kind of thing. So over the years, as soon as I sort of cleaned up, I mean, this is only one element of it. As soon as I've cleaned up my diet, I recognized that had a big impact. As soon as I recognized regular outdoor, not just walking, but where I live is all hills. So I can't really go for a a walk longer than 30 minutes without doing at least 2 steep hills. So the cardio for that it's incredibly valuable. I started running when I was 30, and I don't do drugs. I've never really done drugs, but the runner's high is a thing.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and as soon as I clicked onto that, it's like, okay, cardio, whether it's walking or running, all these things, when I'm sat back at my desk, I recognize the benefits of that. So those are the two main things that I would say. The other would be the music I listen to, the atmosphere within the music sets this going, sets kind of, it's almost like, you know, if you see like a film or a series and their set is so detailed and you see the actors in the middle, you hear the script, and occasionally your eyes will look behind at the set and you'll see details. If those details look cheap, like they've cut corners, your brain will kind of lock onto that.
Sure.
So if they take, I don't really know where I'm going with this. Anything that comes in, I recognize how it comes out. Again, not to repeat myself. So in terms of like keeping up the process of being creative, I have to keep in check everything that happens out of this room. This is my office. Mm-hmm. So I need to make sure everything that's happening out there benefits in here. If I know that, I don't know, we're going out for a meal, anything like that, I have to recognize, right, I'll probably have the day off because my brain's not going to fire emails clearly. It's not going to do sketches clearly, anything like that. If there's anything that that I know will trip me up in the future, I'll avoid it. And let's say I'm in the middle of a big project. Yeah. I'll be like, okay, I'm not going to order a burger and chips this weekend. Not that I do often, but it's up there. I recognize that can wait. I've got this to do. And I know that's going to completely cut in front of it. Have I explained that well enough? Does that make sense?
Man, yes, absolutely. Like there's so many different things on that I've actually come to my mind now. There's multiple questions for you now, but the thing that I can immediately recognize in that is just like the way you were talking about the music that you're into, is that you're probably one of the more rare cases of people who actually knows what they want, or mm-hmm. more importantly, knows what they need, which means that everything that you do is directed towards that one purpose, that one thing mm-hmm. that you've got your mind completely focused on. And I think that's a gift. That's like one of them things, like you can never let go of that or being that way. But mm-hmm. also, I can indirectly recognize the difficulties that being such a way can also possess, because it makes it hard to be adaptable to most of the rest of the world. So, for mm-hmm. example, one place that, at least for me, not saying that it is an issue, but I've certainly seen it being an issue in the past, is in the case of relationships. Because to you've got tunnel vision. You're focusing on that one thing that you want to serve, and that you want to get better at, and you want to, like you said, you filter out any bullshit. So if you've got another person next to you, and if they're bringing in anything from the external world that doesn't belong in there, that creates problems, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can apply for everyone. I'm lucky. My partner, she's really supportive and kind of almost leaves me to it in a way. She understands. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I dip my toe into two sides of things. I have the introspective, creative side that kind of brings the money in, keeps me creatively active. But then I have to kind of step back from that and recognize there are real world things that need addressing in a slightly different mindset than because the creative side is almost it's an escape. Let's face it, for a lot of us, it can be an escape from a lot of the real bullshit that still needs addressing. It's not that we're, avoiding it. It's just whether it's sitting down and writing music, playing gigs, creating a piece of art, anything. I've always assumed that for everyone else, it's like a breather for your mind that you can just ignore things for an hour or a few hours or anything.
Yeah.
So I definitely recognize that I can't bring the creative mentality as full on into the real world. I've got to kind of recognize that, don't be quite so intense.
Yeah. No,
when the music's on and I know that I've got a blank page, everything I do, I always try and aim to one situation. And this situation is my dog's been walked, I've been fed, everything's sorted on that sense. Whether it's in between work or if I'm waiting on the band to get back to me, I might have a day or two where I can literally sit at my desk with a blank page and start from scratch. That, for me, is the absolute essence of anything I'm trying to do. So I can pick an album or a band or even a playlist, anything that, again, going back to in that moment, there's a certain kind of vibe, atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, that I need. I set that up, get to the paper, and I can kind of either think of anything that it's like a spark of something just to start me off with a sketch. And then there's this space where you're able to build on that in terms of like trying ideas, erasing ideas, trying things different ways. And it's that process that keeps me at it every day. It's the process, the process. There's so many times that the end piece I will be happy with to a point, happy with enough to upload it and send it out there. But then my brain goes, you could have done this better. You could have done this differently. Why didn't you try this? You should have maybe tried this. So then I carry all that onto the next piece of work, rinse and repeat that. And that's where you can kind of keep up. I won't say constant creativity. I don't think it's constant, but in terms of like some people might sort of toy with artwork for a month or two and dip out, try other things. That's fair enough. But the reason I'm so kind of headstrong with it is just that it's the process. It's to get into that process, get into that feeling of in my head, all these things are laid out in front of me and I just have to arrange them into whatever it ends up being. Once I'm done with that, then it's kind of back to work, back to real life things. And it's just a constant process of that.
Absolutely. Such a fascinating way to actually describe that process. And you know what? As a songwriter, I feel like I totally relate to that, because there are those moments, for me at least, that they don't happen that often. Because I do live a pretty fucking... I live a very busy life. And obviously songwriting is not what I have to do. But, I have to do it, but for my own reasons, not because the world requires me to, or maybe it does, but not in a modern societal way, I think, there's those moments where you just feel like you're locked in and time stops to exist. And you're just completely in it, and you're always chasing the thing of, so this is where it is here now it's gonna go here, and then it's like I don't know, I've never flown a plane before, but I feel like it must be a bit like that, where it's like you're almost improvising in the middle of the air, and every trail that you leave behind is exactly where that's going to sit in the in the place of history, and even like like there's deeper ways of looking at this as well, because it's like essentially every piece that you create is in some sense a part of your legacy as a human being. So that
Yeah.
and I think that that's obviously when you're doing it and you're in the moment. Not many times we would think of such a thing. Sometimes perhaps we would, especially if it's a particular piece that might be quite, it might have a close connection with death, or if it evolves around that subject. But I feel that essentially everything that you do is that, because one day, someday someone, when you're not here, is gonna look at that, perhaps, and that's gonna be the representation of you as a human being that's gonna be available to them. And I guess the only reason why I would even think like this is because that is how I've interacted with many of my own favorite artists. It's just through their music years after they're gone.
Yeah, it's good to recognize that. I don't think it's wise to live in that, because then you, personally, if I was to kind of let that get too deep, that would affect the now in terms of work.
Of course, absolutely.
I have to make sure I do my work now, and then worry about everything else after. It has to be the truest form of now that I can get. But in terms of like, just with you referencing like the similarities with the songwriting and the creative process, I've been in bands from being like 15, so I can absolutely relate to the process of songwriting and how it can start from one riff, one melody, one lead part, one drum fill, anything. And I've always been conscious of like bringing that to a room of 4, 5, 6 people, whatever, and you all chipping in on that. And as much as I've always genuinely enjoyed that, there's always been a part of me that's like, I have to have something that's all me, that I have full control over. And I've never wanted that in a band sense, because to me that just kind of asks for like all kinds of ego clashes. And I've seen it with other local bands and things where the one person is like, this is my idea, and that's the only thing that kind of goes, kind of thing.
So it's actually kind of it's kind of like that in my band, but it's always been like that. I've always been the main songwriter, and but the thing is, I've never had any complaints, because I also feel like essentially, I think there's actually a line to there's dots to be connected here, but like for me, when I'm creating music, let's say for my own band in Trivax, I know my bass player so well that I know what kind of style he has. I know his entire body language when he's playing bass, so I can compose the lines around his particular style. And the same applies to my drummer as well. I've played with him for over 11 years now, and there's this thing that as a creative where you can exit your own ego and be able to mold into something else, and that's, I guess, very much the case of what you were saying, where you're creating artwork for other projects that you didn't need much direction for, but you yourself imagined it to be different to what you normally do in order to accommodate it. Does that make sense? So I guess there is some levels to this, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the time when I'm given free rein, as they call it, I'll just go back and listen to their back catalogue on repeat. I did it with Paradise Lost because they pretty much just said, do me, which I was really grateful for, but also that's really scary for a band like that, for my connection to them. But that's fair. I put the things in place I needed to. Again, the back catalogue on my phone, out for a walk, and just sketched up here, brought it all back to the desk and kind of built it from there. But yeah, as you said with the band, if you're all on the same, no matter what page you're on, if you're all on the same page, that's all you can ask for. You know, whether it's we tweak the song until everyone's happy, or one person writes the song. Like you say, you're respecting their style, their skill, and understanding. You're including that in your songwriting. It sounds like, anyway.
Yeah.
So that's where their trust must come from, because you're not saying you play this like this, even though it's against their style, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, you're actually absolutely right, you know, because there has been times where I've tried to kind of push the envelope and be like, hey, you should play it like this, because I had an idea and I thought the idea would look good for the band, but it doesn't work quite as well, because it just has to be what those people want to create, you know. So it's like, it's not that I'm against the teamwork or whatsoever. No, like that. Teamwork makes the dream work, you know, as they say. But I think there is a beauty of like just how they grow into their own things, you know, where you create something in your own solitude, in your own mind, but then you come into a room, you add all the volume and like these different perspectives of the other members to it, you know,
and different energies as well.
Exactly, different energies, different backgrounds, you know. It's like no one person is exactly the same as another human being, so you get to add that to it. And I guess it's the same with even just consuming art, you know. Like, for example, let's say we're talking about the Paradise Lost album cover. We know that everyone who looks or observes at a piece of art or listens to it, every human being will see that differently, and they will see that through their own lens and scope. And this will also apply to everyone who's in the band as well. So I'm sure that everyone who's a member of that band, you know, whether it's Nick or if it's the guitarist, they'll still see the album through a different perspective, you know. And I think that's a very fascinating thing that I guess we human beings have, is that like I said earlier, everything is a reaction. You know what I mean? You know, it's that, you know, it's our own eternal thing that we reflect off of.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are some times when I'll present like a full sketch to a client, and I always make sure that if there's any ideas that come up for them, tell me. Like I'm not closed off. And it's 50% of the time, the idea they suggest, I'll go back do, and it works, and it's something I've not thought of. Yeah, you know, but I'm also not kind of too scared to try it, and then I'll present it to them, and I'll say it doesn't quite work, it doesn't quite flow, or anything like that. So then we depend on their reaction to either no worries, thanks for trying, or I really feel that would work. And then we back and forth to kind of get to that center point where we are both happy. Because I never I never complete artwork unless both sides are happy, ever.
Sure.
Even if that takes another 2 months. Because, you know, if I don't like it, that gets released out there, I see it out in the real world, and it'll always be a thorn that you never settle with. And it's the same for them. If I push and push and they settle for, you know, my idea that wasn't theirs or anything like that they weren't keen on, they have to live with that as well. And neither of us want that. So it's kind of, it's both our reactions kind of trying to respect each other and meet in the middle. And in an ideal world, it happens every time, but it doesn't, unfortunately, because creative minds can sometimes clash, you know. But that's the nature of it.
No, yeah, I've had that experience before, man, and it's such a tricky fucking thing, because, you know, like you said, where it's like you don't want to end it unless everyone's on the same page or everyone's happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fantastic thing, but man, that can get dangerous, because you can never be happy with it. You know, that perfectionist mindset of, what if we change it from this to this? And that where it gets to the point that you could almost think, well, where do I end on this? Because this is always improving. and then it ends up improving so much that it becomes something completely different to what it was meant to be.
It's always changing. It's not always necessarily improving.
Change, exactly. That's a more key word there. Exactly.
So I've had the odd client where we've done that, and I've got to the point where I've said, I'm not the guy for this.
Right.
I always respectively, I've said, for whatever reason, we're not getting anywhere, and I'll cut it off there, because you can only try for so long until the point where you're repeating yourself, or you dread the next email coming through and all that kind of thing. And there's been the odd time where I've politely said, I'm not the guy for this particular project. I can recommend some others who may be similar but might have a different approach that might work. And I kind of leave that there. And yeah, it might have been some time kind of maybe wasted, but I don't see it as wasted time, because I needed that to recognize how it could end up, so that I can take that into future clients, future projects, and kind of see the red flags of, I can see this going down a similar route to this, cut it off early. And you see sort of signs of when it's working and when it's maybe not.
Sure. Yeah, it's got to be a synergetic relationship, isn't it? Just quickly, out of curiosity, because I haven't forgotten that you mentioned this, but you said that one of the things that you do to sort of keep your mind clear for creativity is your diet. Just out of curiosity, what kind of diet are we talking about here?
So, I have some. I have gut issues. I've had them for years, and I've never gotten like an official diagnosis. And for a lot of years, up until 25, I'm 36 now. Up until sort of 25, 30 years old, I never really addressed it. I just kind of thought, that's me. I'm ill 90% of the time. I'll figure things out. I've never really sort of tried to change it. And then I turned 30, and I was just sick of it. I was sick of feeling tired, unwell, anxiety through the roof, bouts of depression that I couldn't justify. Like I could literally sit there and think, I've got really good people around me. Everything's kind of okay. And yet I was still feeling just painfully heavy. It was crazy. And then, I turned 30, and I wasn't really overweight, but I had weight to lose, probably about 14 stone. And I just literally looked at like a film, looked in the mirror one day, and I was like, I'm going all in. I'm going to, quote, try and fix myself. I'm going all in. I have to try it. If it doesn't work out, at least I tried, rather than kind of just settling into it and accepting that's who I was.
I like that.
So, I made a note of, again, what I was consuming, how it affected me, basically like a full food diary. And then linked that with how I felt, what my mood was like, what my energy was like, what my artwork was like. I kind of put it all in front of me and kind of laid it all out. And basically, for me personally, it's most processed, hyper-processed stuff just completely annihilates me, puts me out for days.
Seed oils, gluten.
You name it, everything. So at the minute, it's like mostly fish-based, minimal vegetables, potatoes. I can get away with some kind of like the odd little bit of chocolate kind of thing. That's not too bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like a super, super clean, perfectly healthy, but for me, it's kind of like a honed in version of enough to keep my energy up, to keep my mood up, my motivation to be active up, everything. I've kind of, again, it all goes back to recognizing what I'm taking in, how it's affecting me, what I can get away with. If I know I've eaten something in particular, I kind of almost predict the next day I'm going to have brain fog. I'm going to just need to ease off work, anything like that. And I've stuck with that for years now, and it's for the most part it's working. I get
It's
caught out now and again, but yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, first of all, respect to you and kudos for recognizing that. I hope that alone is a good example for people listening to think that just the fact that you had that moment that you were like, you're at least gonna try because why you recognize that hey, something is not right here. I think that's fantastic, and obviously you've made some very positive changes that I think this is also very, very, very important. I can't stress this enough, but the fact that not only did the physical transformation allow you just to, I guess, feel better, look better, but it helped your creativity. It's the fact
Yeah.
that it rejuvenated your intellectualism in a sense. And I think that's very important for a lot of people. Obviously, I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast are probably already on our side of the conversation anyway. But just in case anyone isn't, I think this is why it's important to look after your health. This is why it's important to try and be in good shape. This is why it's important to go outside, get fresh air, and watch after your diet. And obviously, I don't know if you might have seen from my personal accounts or not, but I used to be about 19 stone myself, and I've lost about
Yeah,
six
big
and a half
respect
of
for the
that.
work you've done.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Listen, it's all up here. It's all when you realize what's going on, and then it's just a matter of consistency and putting in the work. And the thing is, I had already lost a lot of weight until maybe about 2 years ago. But it's only the last year or two where I have become militant on the on the actual ingredients and the foods that I actually allow into my body. Rest in case of, like, for example, we said with seed oils. I know I mentioned a few times on the podcast before, but they're the fucking worst thing for you, and they're in everything. You try and buy a meal deal, even though it looks healthy on the surface. And I know we're having a deep conversation on like creativity and whatnot, but this is a super important thing, which I think plays into
Absolutely.
our lives, and it's that having the education to just to be healthy is such an important thing, and yeah, it's I think it's one of the most important things, because like for example, like you said as well, your gut, 90%, I believe, of the serotonin that you've got is created in your gut. So
Yeah.
if you're having food that is fucking with your gut, say for example, whether it's the seed oils, processed foods, gluten. I know a lot of people are very sensitive to that. That's why like so much of the entire country over here suffers from IBS, and no one really acknowledges what might be actually causing these things.
Oh yeah.
As you yourself kind of pointed to as well, I think it's very important that we consider these things, and that we should also, like, on another level, hold the corporations accountable as well for the shit that they've been feeding us for, I'm gonna say, let's say from the 50s, 60s onwards, and it's just progressively getting worse.
It's not a positive cycle. They put the cost of living up, and then the cost of shite, to be blunt, down. So your instinct is to go to what you can afford, which is fair.
Yeah.
But then that locks you into that cycle. And I think if people can give themselves enough time to try it and physically, mentally feel the benefits, that instantly locks you into another cycle, another positive cycle that us talking about only goes so far.
Yeah.
In terms of like people taking action for themselves, not even for like anyone else, just start with yourself. If you can make your one day better in terms of how you wake up, how you approach people, how you converse. All that it changes once you've had a chance to clean things up. And I don't want to go down the kind of preachy route, nothing like that. But people owe themselves the opportunity to feel different than what they've been feeling for the past however long. And I say that out of experience. That's all personal experience for me. You just kind of assume that this is how I am. This is how I deal with things. Yeah, I get anxious over tiny things. I kind of, okay, well, that'll be done soon. It's like, you really don't need to be like that. You can, there are opportunities that you can kind of iron that out. This is why I really enjoy Andrew Huberman and that kind of, there's a group of them that they're delivering really valuable information in a really digestible way, no pun intended. It's so valuable, I can't stress that enough. And for them to do that free on YouTube it's incredible. So
absolutely,
seeing the numbers they get that's good to see. Because obviously people like us are kind of latching on to similar ideas, and hopefully that spreads out into wider areas socially, kind of thing. And we can only hope that spreads.
Well, the thing is, like, it's first of all, just from the point of being like you said, preaching and whatnot, it's not preaching as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, it's leading by example. And I believe you and I are both, I guess, successful examples of that, so I think there's a mutual respect there already. But I think that for a lot of people, that realization is very important. And like you said, it's good that, so much of the quality of your life that you can just improve by simply looking after your health, by changing your escapisms, like through, like you said, like you'll go to work and then you'll go to canteen and it's like, oh, I've had a very stressful, like I've had a lot of calls this morning. It won't hurt if I just have this like little cookie here. I've earned it. I deserve
a treat.
Yeah, you deserve a treat. Like, what are you talking about? That is something that's like, and I don't want to fuck with people too much because I get that some people like they need the treat, but the way I look
at it, I have my own
it,
version of my treats, but I recognize that if that's every day or every week, it's not a treat anymore, Yeah,
exactly. I think, same. So do I. Like, I have things as well, like I have my own vices as well. Because I don't drink or do drugs anymore. And, and I eat very clean, I think. I would like to think anyway, but I still have my own vices as well. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with that as such. And even with food, so I sometimes, like I have something, but then I make up my mind and I decided, hey, I'm going to enjoy this. But the point of it is that from just a nutritional perspective, cookie or, like a cupcake, these aren't things that are going to do you any favors. So why not look at it as a treat? Why not look at a treat as something that's actually going to benefit you? Let's say, for example, a steak or a liver. And I know that like not everyone's gonna want to feel like carrying around fucking raw liver with them all day and chewing on that. But but like you can appreciate that there's this it's not an ideological thing, but rather just education. And I, like yourself, really hope that education gets out there to a lot of people, and because it can change a lot of lives. And just whilst we're there as well, you mentioned some aspects of mental health that you obviously, especially you said in the younger years, you used to have some challenges with, I should say. Just from a point of curiosity, because this is something that actually popped into my head right at the beginning of our conversation, and I made a little mental note of it. But you said that you've been doing this, obviously you've always been sketching and drawing since you were a kid. Were there any perhaps, and this is not a presumption by any means, it's just a question out of curiosity, but did you have possibly any kind of, I guess, traces, I should say, of certain symptoms like ADHD perhaps, or anything like that at all at a young age?
Possibly. Nothing official, nothing diagnosed, but it's possible. I mean, even now, certain things that I've learned over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, diet wise, it can trigger ADHD type symptoms that pass as my body kind of deals with that food and passes on. I've always said I should have really made notes of everything over these years because it's an interesting read. There's a book called The Gut and the Brain Connection or something like that that basically explains about the vagus nerve, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said about the gut brain connection.
Yeah.
And the signals that travel there, obviously, I think they used to think they started at your gut and then went to your brain, and then they realized it was the other way around or something. But that connection is everything. It affects everything in one way or the other. And so in terms of sort of different symptoms, there's a symptom called trichotillomania, which is hair pulling.
Trichotillomania.
Trichotillomania. And I've had that since middle school. It used to be my head. It used to be my eyebrows. Now it's my beard. But again, diet either ramps that up or takes that away. And exercise takes that away. So I think, obviously, everyone's got their own version of what their body does with all sorts. But for me personally, because I went to, is it CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, for the pulling. And I did a full session of that. And then the last sort of meeting, we basically ended up on try not to do it for 2 seconds. And we should have done that. And then tried not to do it for 5 seconds. And then their idea was you'll expand kind of the space between pulling and then suddenly it'll disappear.
So it's like training your mind, essentially.
Yeah, which, fair enough. But
and how old were you at the time?
Maybe 30. Like, not even that long ago.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And that was just around the time that you sort of changed things, right?
Yeah. And then as I realized, I started seeing the pattern in, because the only exercise I used to do was walking. And it wasn't until 30 that I started running. And as soon as I started running, I come back and the anxiety was down. And my diet was generally clean in order for me to be able to get out running in the first place. So that they came together. So then I recognized that the pulling came down, my anxiety came down, my depression came down, and everything life-wise, it was still in place. I was dealing with all these things in a completely different way, in a positive way. You know, I could take more on. I could kind of explain myself clearer, everything.
Interesting.
Now, the pulling hasn't gone completely because, for whatever reason, but it's enough to have a beard. I don't have big bald patches like I used to. It's honestly, the level is crazy. So if anyone can kind of relate to anything in that sense in any way, just consider something outside the box. Don't consider medication. I got offered medication when I first approached the doctor. And I just knew straight away that's not the path for me. Don't get me wrong. Some medication works for some people, and I'm all for that. Absolutely all for that. But there was something telling me I just felt that came with its own kind of like weird path, and I didn't want to go down that. I wanted to at least try my own version.
Was it a gut feeling that told you not to take it?
It was indeed a gut feeling, yes. Yeah, so I'm glad I stuck with that, and I'm happy where I've got to now. And again, if people can find their own version of that, that's golden.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think there's so many different aspects to this as well. Like there's such a multitude of just understanding our bodies and our physiology. I mean, the body is such a complex thing. You know, it's almost like so. Essentially, I think what we're talking about here is making yourself just speaking purely on creativity, which I suppose as artists would be our function, right? And obviously each to their own right, and you know, obviously yourself, you that's your whole life and what you do. I think essentially what it comes down to is being able to allow yourself to be not just ready in terms of mindset or just goals or little thinking, but rather with your entire full physical being, be ready and willing to receive information. And for that to happen properly, you need to be able to have a vessel which is able to channel things properly, which then you need the right tools, be it sleep, sunlight, diet, foods that aren't inflammatory, and exercise and things like that to then make your vessel functioning in the way that it should, so that it can channel and manifest essentially the things that it is meant to. Isn't that a special thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And going back to the whole mainstream kind of the news and everything, it's all dialed against that,
It
seemingly.
is.
You know, there's nothing to encourage that. And that's where I go back to, we owe it to ourselves to kind of try and get out of that loop as much as we can.
How much do you think that's also the type of thing that could also be connected to religion and spiritual experiences?
Quite a lot, I would imagine. Yeah. The brain latches onto things in crazy ways. And I think obviously people's upbringing has a massive impact on that. And when you're young, generally the people around you, you assume that's the way, you know, whether it's positive or negative, it's like that's how people are. That's what people believe. I wasn't brought up religious generally. I was christened. My mum's Christian. My dad's indifferent. If that was a religion, that'd be his indifferent.
Sure.
So nothing was ever pushed, and I kind of got into my late teens, and I found like the atheist movement, as it was, sort of Richard Dawkins, Chris Hitchens kind of thing. And in a way, looking back, that was kind of like my religion because I went all in.
Right.
To the point where I look back now and like that affected how I viewed people with religion in their life in not a very nice way.
Which is essentially, actually, at its core, something that a lot of religious people do, ironically enough.
People can do it to each other in various ways.
I've been there, by the way. Like, I've had that exact same process that you just described. So that's why, like, I can wholeheartedly understand that. Yeah. So what's been sort of your evolution past that then?
Recognizing the different paths that people are on, and we have very little, if and no control over someone else's path. We just have to react accordingly to what they're bringing to the table, whether it's a conversation with someone you meet out in the street. As an example, in our village, there's a local church group. It's only a small village. And I think it must be once a year, but it's happened recently. They'll put like little handwritten notes through your door randomly, just wishing you well, inviting you to the church. They're there if we need them, that kind of thing. Now, years ago, there'd have been a part of me that would have wanted to find out who sent it and go and politely ask them not to. because it's not for me. I appreciate the thought. And I'd honestly have gone down that path and kind of respectively said, please don't include me on your route, whatever it was. And I suppose part of it is maturity, as you get older. But now it's just kind of like okay, that's pleasant. That's not negative generally. That's something they felt they need to do. It's not a bag of dog shit from a letterbox. It's a nice little note. I'll just take it for what it is, move on with my day, recycle it or whatever, anything. So I think I've kind of met there's a point in the middle where they're doing their thing. Yeah, it affects me to a point. How I let it affect me is the important thing. My reaction is the important thing. Same as their reaction if I'd have gone to them and asked them not to, whatever. So I kind of feel like I've gone one side of the pendulum kind of thing, and I'm met in the middle somewhere now. I just have to make sure my day is as, what's the term? Manageable as it is. Make sure my dog's happy, my partner's happy, I'm happy. Everything else out of that is out of my control.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah, man, absolutely. And it's
don't get me wrong, like obviously seeing the things in the world that religion affects and the way that the core religions have been twisted, that's never nice to see. And I genuinely don't think they'll ever go away. I think there will always be a form of it. I think it's an unfortunate part of human nature. We as the human race, we're never going to be perfect ever. As much as we campaign and try and change things, there's no perfection. We're essentially animals at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think to me, just religion alone is very much like it's like nuclear energy. It can either, I think, contribute to total destruction, or it can contribute to limitless energy and self-sustained energy. And I think it can go either way with that. And that's something that it's taken me a lot of years of like mentally wrestling with this in my own head to actually recognize that within myself, especially coming from an Islamic country. I had nothing but disdain for that religion, and don't get me wrong, I'll still criticize it to this day, but at the very least, I don't look at a Muslim person the same way that I would, where, back then I always felt like this sort of anger that you are the reason that my home country has completely gone to shit. You are the reason why I can perform music freely back home with my friends and family, and you are the reason why I have to be away. But I look at this differently now, I have to admit, and I look at it like there is truth to that. It's not like that's not true, but it's just that I look at it from a change of perspective, and it's that I think everyone is just trying to do the right thing, and they're going off of the information that they have available to them. And when you get into the subject of occult and spirituality, because Islam is a worldwide cult. That's what it is. And and I know the word cult has negative connotations generally, and it certainly could. That's still the reality of it, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but Islam is a cult. That's what it is. So is Christianity and Judaism and so on.
So to me, atheism can be as well.
Yeah, very, very valid point. And I think just to the point of like what we were talking about earlier as well is how we identify with our reactions. I think the fact that your younger self would have made the effort just to go and to tell them to not do that again, that I think would have been a reflection of you at that time. It's not like the religion changed, but that just would have been who you were at that time, which
absolutely, yeah.
Again, like I said, it's very much that case of the nuclear energy situation that we're talking about. But yeah, for me, I've been able to recognize that it's not it's a tool. Religion's a tool. I think that there is truth to it. I think that what they're all saying, because they all have way more in common than not. And
they're all borrowed from each other. Absolutely.
Exactly. So I think that in between all of them is the real truth. I don't think
Mhm.
that any of them are the perfect truth. That's the problem. The moment that anyone claims to have the full picture, that's the moment where I start to doubt them. That's the
The
moment
first
where,
red flag.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because I think that there's truth in Christianity, there's truth in Islam, there's truth in theistic Satanism. There's truth in all of that, as far
Yeah.
as I'm concerned.
I've always felt like most of, if not all of the religious ideals, I've almost kind of pictured it as a pan of water. You imagine nice, still, calm water. The essence of what they're teaching is calm, still, positive. You turn the heat up on that water, it's going to overflow.
Sure.
It's going to, which is, I see as a negative. And it's over the years, as ideals have changed, as people have recognized they can, uh, twisting it a certain way can benefit them in a way, even if it's negative to someone else. That's another path of using religion. So that splits off into different people. And it almost gets kind of, what's the term? I keep coming back to overboiled. It's overboiled, and they're
Yeah.
missing the core stillness of it, which is essentially what they're all passing around and using in their own way for their own idea. But if you can kind of think past that, read past that, discuss the details enough to get through all of that, there is some good there. There is. And I think that relates to us discussing in terms of taking action for yourself. I think a lot of that can relate to a lot of the core religious thing, whether it's, I don't mean in terms of believing in beings, I mean in what they represent and what they bring to someone. I think it's all related to actually, I don't like really using the word soul and essence kind of thing. It sounds a bit too much, but that's something we all have, no matter what you believe, no matter what your perspective is, where you live, your upbringing. We've all got that, whatever that is. And I think it's been clouded by too many misplaced ideas, I think.
For sure. And you know what? Here's an interesting one for you. And this is something I've thought about a lot. But if, let's say, if there was a real devil, that's what it would be. It's the distraction. It's not necessarily just evil, but rather the distraction from achieving perfection. That's the way I think of it. It's the justification of, well, there's some fucked up things here, so I'm now going to abandon this entire path. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think a lot of short-lived pleasures sit in that realm. Like we were saying about the whole treat thing, processed food thing. It has a 10-minute lifespan essentially. Yeah, you enjoy consuming it, even if it's another form of consumption in whatever that way is. If that's 10 minutes of feeling whatever the feeling is, feeling better, to quote, that's going to have more of a negative effect afterwards, after that 10 minutes. And you have to kind of weigh up, And in terms of like the devil and things, I've always seen it as dark and light.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of benefits to both. You have to recognize both. You can't be all in the light and ignore the dark, because things are going to come up when you don't need them to, and it's going to really, throw you off your path.
Very true.
Also, you can't always be in the dark either. You have to recognize you need to bring in the light and make them work together. And I genuinely believe that's what we've all got somewhere in here, wherever it is, that's got misplaced over the years, I think.
In essence, you can't have burgers and chips every day. You can.
That's
yeah, but
I mean, you're gonna have consequences. You're gonna be limited, but physically you could, and it's. I find it similar to this whole kind of free speech type thing of like censorship and all this kind of thing.
Hmm?
Essentially, you can say whatever you want, but you have to recognize there's going to be consequences that come with that on different levels. And if you're ready to be responsible for them and deal with them in whatever way is necessary, say it. Say what you feel. You know, I'm not advocating people be nasty for no reason. I'm not saying that. But in terms of views that are going to upset some people and some people will agree with, obviously, there's plenty of those. If you're responsible enough to accept that there are going to be consequences that you're going to have to deal with, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's actually such an important thing, because I feel like at the moment we're kind of in the opposite of that, in the sense that a lot of people are being silenced, but on the other side, a lot of people will say shit, but they'll never have to really take accountability for it either, or if it's, or perhaps it's the wrong things, you know, like, I very much like you, I believe in everyone having the freedom to express themselves, but to have to, at the very least, be able to justify it, or perhaps if they were wrong, apologize for it, or if they still feel strongly about it, explain why. Why do they feel strongly about it? You know, these whys are very important things that I think that we're sort of excluding from a lot of very important conversations in today's world, where we're not trying to get to know why a person came to the conclusion that they did, and rather just try and impose our own, that's just not how it works, man. You know, that's going to create a lot of problems. It's going to cause for a
Well,
lot
it has. Yeah, we've seen it in real time now. People are saying things and they're not open to discussing it, seemingly. You know, again, going back to the whole social media thing, it's essentially a mask. It's almost like a one sentence mask where you put something out there, someone can challenge it, and then you can just, oh no, I don't need to justify myself. Sometimes you do, you know. Sometimes you do, not to win the other person over, but just to back up whatever statement it is you've said. So I feel like we're going to come back around at some point in terms of not jumping on everyone and actually listening and discussing. And I think people like yourselves that are opening platforms like this and giving people opportunity to iron things out. And even for myself, like my process, I genuinely don't talk to anyone about my process. It's all up here. It's all just circulating up here. So I'm really
I appreciate that, man.
I can work through that. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that very much, and thank you so much for jumping on. That's exactly what it is, man. You know, like for me, just personally, between you and I have a curious mindset. I want to know the whys, which are often buried, and I guess that sometimes the answer is just not really pleasant. But to me, I'll flat out say this. I am curious, just hypothetically speaking, why someone in 2023 wants to be a Muslim. I'm curious why someone would want to be a Christian. I'm curious why someone would want to be an atheist. I'm curious why someone would even want to be a national socialist, whatever that even means nowadays. But I'm curious as to how someone got to that conclusion. And the same applies to how someone wants to be a woke person, an Antifa person, a communist. I'm interested in all of that. I want to know what are people experiencing that's leading them down a path where they've come to those conclusions. And that's not necessarily just so that I can then debate it. Part of it is so that I can make sense of it for myself, and that I can accept it. And perhaps if there's room, I might try and change that person's mind, but my purpose isn't to change someone's mind, but rather understand their perspective and maybe show them my way of doing things. Maybe I'll agree with them on some things and maybe I won't. But
how many people, though, with those types of beliefs never get the opportunity to openly, outwardly discuss it and go back and forth? Most people don't, or they do with the people that have those same beliefs, which you're running around in circles sniffing each other's asses. You're not getting anywhere.
Exactly.
So
yes.
for someone to openly listen to someone with different views to them, discuss views, that can only be positive. As long as it's done for the right reasons, that can only be positive, because either person might come to a conclusion they've not even considered before without you sort of putting your points over. You know, it's an opportunity for them to digest their own views without it staying up here. It's out and it's real.
Absolutely, yeah.
Discussion, I think, is the only way to get that.
Listen, man. I mean, I'm sure you've listened, as you said, you've listened to other episodes of the podcast, and you know how much I'm an advocate for civil discourse, and I also think that I give myself this opportunity to sometimes be challenged on things as well. It is that if your ideas are really good, then they should be put to test and they should be challenged, rather than you're now right for eternity and anyone who says anything else is wrong and they're an asshole and they should be completely silenced forever. That's just not, that's not very much in touch. Exactly. No. That's just not in touch with reality, and there's not going to be any improvement that's going to come from that. On the contrary, like you said, discussions will lead to positive outlets. But yeah, Adrian, what a fucking cool conversation, man. I've really enjoyed this.
Enjoyed it. Yeah. Thank you for having me, man. I'm really grateful again for the opportunity, and keep doing what you're doing, man. Because I've been introduced to bands that I've not known before through you, and I've also heard discussions from bands that I did know that I haven't heard them talk like that before. So I'm all in. Thank you.
Fucking awesome to hear, man. That's really cool to hear. And actually, even with yourself, I think I've followed your work. I just realized that I never even mentioned this during our conversation, but I think I actually originally discovered you through some merch design that you did for Shamash. And I'm gonna guess that was from maybe 2018, 17, 18, I think, from around that time.
About right.
Yeah. So I've actually followed your work since then. So it's really cool that we just had the chance to obviously have this conversation, and I'm sure that there will be more at some point down the line anyway. But yeah, man, it's great to get to know you and speak to you. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for jumping on. Is there any place where people can come and check out some of your work, which you've got going?
Instagram and Facebook, as much as I've bashed them. Instagram and Facebook. I don't have my own website. I try and keep social media as work. You'll get an occasional dog photo, and that's about it.
Yeah. I think, are you still doing, I'm guessing you're still doing commission works and whatnot, yeah?
Yeah, it's mostly commissions. And then between those, I do my own personal work, which leads to print releases and that kind of thing. So it's just kind of same cycle, like client work, personal work, and then sort of anything in between that, really.
Fantastic, man. I absolutely recommend to everyone to come and check out some of your work. I mean, your Instagram account is like, you can scroll through that and just look at all the details for like hours, man. There's so much, there's such a wealth of material on there. Absolutely love it, and you got a great style. And yeah, man, you keep doing what you're doing as well. Keep being the sponge that you are, and bring all that good stuff into the material world. So yeah, man.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Likewise, man. And to everyone else listening to the podcast, thank you all very much for listening to this episode of Iblis Manifestations. We hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, see you on the next one.